I still remember the exact moment I realized my marriage had quietly turned into a trial I didn't know I was standing in. Because it wasn't during a fight or a dramatic confession, it was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law that simply said, "I'm worried about the dog," and my stomach dropped before I even asked why. Her concern wasn't new, but the tone was different this time, heavier, as if she had already made up her mind about something. And when I pressed her gently, she told me that my husband, Marcus, had mentioned how overwhelmed I was, how I barely tolerated our dog Atlas anymore, how I'd even talked about giving him away because he was too much work. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling, the smell of antiseptic from the vet clinic still clinging to my clothes because I'd just come back from Atlas's routine checkup, paid for, scheduled, and attended by me as always. And it felt like someone had reached into my chest and twisted something vital. Atlas was asleep at my feet, his big golden body rising and falling with slow breaths, one ear twitching when I gasped softly, and I knelt down to bury my face in his fur, whispering that it was okay, that I had him, even as a cold realization crept in that Marcus was rewriting reality behind my back. When we first got Atlas 3 years ago, Marcus had been the one who insisted, promising long walks and training sessions and weekend hikes, painting himself as the ideal dog dad, but within weeks the novelty wore off, and it was me waking up early for walks, me cleaning up accidents, me researching food brands and supplements, me rushing home from work when Atlas had an upset stomach. While Marcus complained about fur on the couch and chewed shoes, slowly retreating from responsibility until it all rested on my shoulders. I didn't mind at first, because Atlas and I formed a bond that felt almost sacred, a silent understanding built through early mornings and late-night cuddles, through vet visits where I held his paw and whispered reassurances while Marcus scrolled on his phone, through moments where I chose patience, even when I was exhausted, because Atlas wasn't just a dog to me. He was a living, breathing promise I intended to keep. The problem was that Marcus didn't see Atlas as a promise. He saw him as leverage, something he could use when the narrative suited him, and I didn't fully grasp that until the whispers began. It started subtly, comments at family dinners about how I was too strict with Atlas's diet, how I wouldn't let him have table scraps, jokes about me being cold, controlling, overly attached, and I laughed them off at first, assuming everyone knew better, assuming truth would speak for itself, but truth is fragile when someone else is telling a louder story. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Marcus sitting on the couch with his sister, Leah, Atlas shut out on the balcony despite the chilly air, and when I asked why, Marcus sighed dramatically and said he was giving the dog a break from my constant rules, that Atlas needed space from my hovering, and Leah nodded sympathetically, glancing at me with something like pity. And that was when I realized how far the lie had already traveled. I didn't confront Marcus that night because instinct told me something more calculated was happening, something that thrived on my emotional reactions, and instead I did what I've always done when things feel unstable. I started documenting everything. I pulled out Atlas's folder, the one I kept meticulously organized, vet records, vaccination schedules, receipts for food, grooming, training classes, emergency visits, notes I'd scribbled about symptoms and behaviors, and I added more, photos of me walking him, timestamps from appointment confirmations, emails from the vet addressing me directly, and as I compiled it all, my sadness hardened into resolve. Marcus could lie to his family, but he couldn't erase paper trails, and he certainly couldn't erase the relationship I'd built with the one being used as a pawn. The final straw came when Marcus suggested, casually over dinner, that maybe Atlas would be happier with someone else, someone with more time and patience, looking at me pointedly as if daring me to react, and I felt something inside me go very still, because I understood then that this wasn't about the dog at all. It was about control. About painting me as the villain so he could justify whatever came next. I told him calmly that Atlas wasn't going anywhere, that his care was not up for discussion, and Marcus smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes, saying we'd see what the family thought. And that night, as Atlas slept curled against my side, I promised him silently that no matter how ugly this became, I would protect him. Even if it meant exposing truths Marcus never expected to come into the light. I didn't sleep much after that conversation because every time Atlas shifted beside me, I imagined someone taking him away, based on a lie told loudly enough. And by morning, my fear had sharpened into focus, the kind that makes decisions feel inevitable instead of scary. I called our vet as soon as the clinic opened, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest, and asked if Dr. Evelyn Hart could spare a few minutes because there was a situation developing involving Atlas's care, and when she recognized my name, she immediately told me to come by later that day. Walking into the clinic felt different this time, less routine and more like stepping into a courtroom where facts mattered. And when Dr. Hart sat across from me in her office, I laid everything out, the comments, the rumors, Marcus's suggestion of rehoming, and the way he'd been framing me as negligent or cruel. And her eyebrows drew together in concern as she listened, because she knew Atlas, she knew me, and she knew exactly who showed up for every appointment. She pulled Atlas's file from the system and printed a comprehensive summary. Dates, notes, treatments, all addressed to me, and she told me plainly that if it ever came to it, she would testify without hesitation that I was Atlas's primary and responsible caregiver, that Marcus's presence had been sporadic at best, and hearing that felt like oxygen after holding my breath for weeks. I thanked her, tucked the documents into my bag, and on the drive home, I realized that Marcus's narrative wasn't just about family gossip anymore. It was laying groundwork, and the thought sent a chill through me, because groundwork means intention. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of every interaction, every phone call Marcus took in another room, every casual remark he made about how stressful Atlas was, how worried his parents were, how maybe it would be better if someone else took over. And I noticed how he never said me anymore, never acknowledged the hours I spent or the sacrifices I made, as if erasing me made his version easier to sell. When Marcus announced that his family was hosting a big picnic the following weekend, one of those sprawling gatherings with cousins and neighbors and enough food to feed a small army, my instincts flared, because he emphasized that Atlas should come too, said it would be good for everyone to see how things really were, and the way he said really felt like a challenge. I agreed, not because I trusted him, but because I knew avoiding it would look like guilt, and if this was going to be a test, I intended to walk in prepared. The morning of the picnic, I packed Atlas's bag like I always did. Water, treats approved by the vet, his harness, first aid basics, and Marcus watched me with a smirk that made my skin prickle, asking why I was being so dramatic, telling me dogs survived just fine without all that fuss. And I didn't respond, because my silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The park was already buzzing when we arrived, laughter and music drifting through the trees, and almost immediately I felt eyes on me, assessing glances, whispers that stopped when I got close, and Atlas sensed it too, pressing against my leg as if grounding me, and I bent down to scratch behind his ears, whispering that he was a good boy, because no matter what happened, he deserved calm. Marcus was in his element, holding court, telling exaggerated stories about how hard it was to manage Atlas, how I overreacted to every little thing, how he worried about the dog's quality of life, and each word felt like a small cut. But I reminded myself that cuts can bleed truth if you let them. Halfway through the afternoon, while kids ran and adults chatted, Atlas took off after a thrown frisbee, something he'd done 100 times, and in a split second, everything changed, because his yelp cut through the noise like a siren, sharp and panicked, and I saw him stumble, his leg twisting unnaturally as he fell. I was running before anyone else reacted, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear, and when I reached him, he was shaking, eyes wide with pain, and I scooped his head into my hands, checking him the way Dr. Hart had taught me, knowing instantly this wasn't something that could wait. I shouted that we needed to go to the emergency vet, that I was taking him now, and I looked to Marcus, expecting him to move, to help, to do anything, but he just stood there frozen, face pale, muttering that it was probably nothing, that dogs shake it off, that maybe we should wait and see. And in that moment, with Atlas whimpering in my arms, something crystallized for everyone watching. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just lifted Atlas as carefully as I could and said, "I'm going now," and I walked away, ignoring the stunned silence behind me, my focus narrowing to the rhythm of Atlas's breathing and the path ahead. At the emergency clinic, everything moved fast. Technicians rushing, questions firing, and I answered them all automatically, reciting Atlas's medical history, allergies, medications, while Marcus was conspicuously absent. And as they took Atlas for imaging, my hands finally started to shake, adrenaline draining into exhaustion and fear. Dr. Leap Hart arrived not long after, having been called in, and when she confirmed that Atlas had a ligament injury that required immediate care, she also confirmed something else, loudly enough for the waiting room to hear, that I'd done exactly the right thing by bringing him in immediately, that delaying could have caused permanent damage, and that kind of clarity felt like a door opening. Marcus eventually showed up, flustered and defensive, trying to minimize what happened, but Dr. Hart didn't let him, calmly stating that in her professional opinion, Atlas's well-being had been consistently ensured by me and only me. And the room felt charged, like everyone present understood that this wasn't just about a dog anymore. As Atlas was stabilized and settled for observation, Dr. Hart turned to me and said something that felt like both validation and warning, that if this situation escalated, I should be ready, because the truth was on my side. And I nodded, knowing that the next confrontation wouldn't be private, it would be public, and it would change everything. I thought the hardest part would be waiting for Atlas to wake up enough to look at me again, but it turned out the harder part was what came after, because truth has a way of rippling outward once it's exposed. Word about the incident spread through Marcus's family faster than I expected, details sharpened by fear and embarrassment, and by the time Atlas was released with his leg wrapped and a strict recovery plan outlined under my name, not ours, I could feel the ground shifting beneath everything Marcus had built. At home, while Atlas slept fitfully beside me, I replayed the moment Marcus stayed behind at the picnic, his hesitation branded into my mind, and I realized that no amount of spin could erase what people had seen with their own eyes. Over the next few days, calls started coming in, first from his mother, her voice tentative as she asked how Atlas was doing and whether I needed help with anything, then from his sister, who asked more pointed questions about the vet visit, about why Marcus hadn't been there, about why Dr. Hart's report listed me as sole caregiver, and I answered honestly, without embellishment, because honesty no longer felt dangerous, it felt like armor. Marcus oscillated between anger and denial, accusing me of humiliating him, of making him look bad on purpose, as if I had orchestrated Atlas's injury just to prove a point. And the absurdity of that accusation snapped something inside me, because it showed me just how far he was willing to go to avoid accountability. When his parents invited us over for a follow-up family dinner, saying they wanted to check on Atlas and clear the air, I agreed, bringing the vet records, the medication schedule, and Atlas himself, moving carefully but alert, and the tension in the room was palpable from the moment we arrived. Marcus tried to control the narrative, opening with jokes about how dramatic everything had become, but his mother cut him off gently and asked me to explain what the vet had said. And as I spoke, laying out the facts, the timelines, the care routines, I watched faces change, confusion giving way to realization. His father asked why Marcus didn't know any of this, why he couldn't answer simple questions about Atlas's diet or medication, and Marcus's silence was louder than any accusation I could have made. Then, Dr. Hart's words echoed through the room again when his sister mentioned she'd spoken to the clinic herself, that Dr. Hart had been very clear about who she dealt with, and something in Marcus's parents seemed to settle. A decision forming without drama or shouting. They told Marcus plainly that they had believed him because it was easier than questioning him, but that the evidence was undeniable, that Atlas was safe because of me, not despite me, and that spreading lies about cruelty was unacceptable. And I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness, because this wasn't a victory lap, it was a reckoning. Marcus lashed out then, accusing everyone of turning against him, of choosing a dog over their own son, and in that moment I saw him clearly, not as my husband, but as someone who needed an enemy to avoid looking inward, and I realized I was done volunteering for that role. I told them I was taking Atlas home, that he needed rest and consistency, and as I stood to leave, Marcus's mother thanked me quietly for standing up for Atlas when he couldn't speak for himself, and that gratitude carried more weight than any apology. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's story unraveled completely, because once one lie is exposed, people start pulling at the rest, and his attempts to paint me as negligent lost traction everywhere they'd been planted. Atlas healed slowly under my care, each small improvement a reminder of why I'd fought so hard, and as he learned to trust his leg again, I learned to trust my own instincts, understanding that being calm and prepared wasn't weakness, it was strength refined by love. When I finally filed for separation, it felt less like an ending and more like alignment, my life settling into a shape that made sense again, centered on honesty and responsibility. At a later family gathering I attended alone, Atlas walking carefully but proudly beside me, no one questioned who his person was because they had seen it in crisis, in action, and truth doesn't need repetition once it's lived. Standing there, feeling Atlas lean into me, I knew that the story Marcus tried to tell about me had failed, not because I argued louder, but because I showed up when it mattered, and that was something no lie could ever undo.
You've just stepped into her revenge side, where every wound finds its justice, and every silence ends with truth. If her story struck a chord, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Another secret waits in the next video. See how her revenge begins.